Okay, welcome to our next lesson in our forensic economics course. Uh, Title of today's lesson is How can an economist determine if there's evidence of discrimination? So, discrimination certainly is a big issue, and sometimes lawsuits are raised to say, has there been, say, gender discrimination? And the gender wage gap's the one I'll focus on, but any type of discrimination, which economists define as unequal pay for equal work, lawsuits could be filed for this. If it's for race, race or ethnicity, gender, those are probably the two most common. But in theory, I guess age, there could be age discrimination lawsuits as well. So, this is prominent in the media. So, Barack Obama, April 8th, and this was not this year, this was in April 8th of 2014. Today, the average full-time working woman earns just 77 cents on the dollar for a man, for every dollar a man earns. In 2014, that's an embarrassment. It is wrong. That's Obama's quote. So it's illegal for firms to discriminate. So if Obama's statement is correct, I think the first thing we should ask is, how come every single firm in the country isn't sued? I mean, if there's really 77 cents on the dollar, unequal pay for equal work, it would have to be the vast majority of firms are discriminating, right? I mean, it would almost have to be the case. Otherwise, if you're saying it's half the firms, that means each firm is paying 50 cents on the dollar. So how could that possibly be correct? Well, the answer is it isn't really correct. A lot of people on the gender wage gap do mislead the public, and in fact, on this particular statement, the Washington Post, when they did their ratings, they actually gave it a Pinocchio rating, right? He was lying, they say. Lie might be a strong word, but certainly stretching the truth to try to imply that it's gender discrimination that's causing that. So every firm isn't sued because most firms aren't paying unequally for equal work. Now, there certainly is a gap. Now, the 77 cents on a dollar, it wasn't completely made up, but that's the average difference in wages for all men and all women, right? If you take all the wages for men divided by the number of men working, all the wages for women divided by the number of women working, well, women are paid 77%. Okay, well, there's a whole lot of factors that aren't being considered here. First of all, if you simply would move away from, say, weekly or annual wages to hourly wage, the gap is all of a sudden shrinks considerably. It might shrink in half just by doing that, as men work longer hours. Once you factor in working in different jobs, work experience, time out to raise children, the gender wage gap's basically gone. Some studies will say we can't explain 4% or 5% of the gap, and they might credit it to discrimination, even though that's not really as accurate as you might think, because, well, just because we can't explain why, it doesn't mean there wasn't a reason. But others have actually found the reverse gender wage gap. I know there's studies that show that women in their 20s who don't have children out-earn men in their 20s, in the same age range. Well, is that discrimination? If it's not, why could you make a claim that it's gender discrimination one way and not another? I mean, so there's a lot going on here. But on average, it certainly is not the issue one would think. In fact, economic theory predicts firms that discriminate would be punished and really going to basically go out of business if it's a competitive market if they discriminate. But it doesn't mean no firms do that, right? On average, there's not really a gender wage gap or a wage gap based on race or other factors. Economic theory predicts there shouldn't be, because if firms are interested in making profits, even if there is a bit of prejudice, firms are going to want to hire the person who makes them the most money. But just because of this, it certainly doesn't mean that some firms don't do it. Some firms would pay to discriminate. Other firms might have people in a position of power who they don't necessarily care as much about the profits of the firm, and they might discriminate, which when we say economic discrimination, we are referring to unequal wages for equal contributions to output, or unequal wages for equal work. So there's certainly nationwide. I mean, we're a very large nation. There are going to be some firms that do discriminate. Also, we have lawyers who will I use opportunistic to be as nice as possible to the lawyers who would do this, but there are some lawyers, when there really isn't a case, will still sue anyway because they want money. There are, unfortunately, people who will sue for all sorts of frivolous reasons, and there are lawyers who will do that as well. So some opportunistic lawyers might sue hoping for a settlement. So some of the time it could be legitimate, some of the time it might not be. This is where the forensic economist might come into play. So how could a forensic economist be useful? Well, it could be for the prosecuting or defense attorneys, right? The prosecuting attorney says, we really think there's gender discrimination here. They might hire a forensic economist to look at the data. Defense attorneys say, we're getting sued. Can you look at this data to see what's going on? Both cases, in theory, once again, right, the analysis should be about the same either way. So the forensic economist would want to assess whether or not there appears to be unequal pay for equal work. And it's not going to be possible usually to determine this for sure. Like, right, this is not going to be what you'll figure anything out with certainty. But you can look for evidence of it. So what you would want is data on each worker, and with that worker, you need what is their gender. If it's a case where it's alleged race-based discrimination, you would want race. Of course, you'd want each individual worker's earnings, time at the firm, highest degree attained, position at the firm, anything else that's relevant that could explain an earnings difference. So if you can explain all of the difference in earnings, there would not be the evidence that there's discrimination, at least unequal pay for equal work. Now, there could be certainly discrimination in hiring, right? And that's a little bit tougher to prove in this case, and as far as what we're covering in this class right now, we're going to just look at earnings-based discrimination. Or if you have different job types, could you have discrimination in who's put in what jobs? Sure, you could have that. But if you can find, if you look through and you say, well, yeah, on average, one group is paid less than another, but the group that's paid less doesn't have as much experience and is in these types of jobs that generally make lower wages, and therefore that's why there's lower salaries. There are certain occupations that make less. So if you cannot figure this out, then you may not have a claim. Or I'm sorry, if you cannot explain all the difference in earnings, then you may actually have a claim that there's been discrimination. Right? If you cover in every variable you can cover, and there's still like a 10% gap in wages between men and women, well then you might have something. Now then again, you might not. And this is the issue you run into, because just because you can't explain something doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't some other reason that just isn't in the data, but it would provide some evidence for this. In class, for those who are taking the forensic economics course here with me, we'll be going through some examples with some Excel files, and we'll be doing some analysis on this. But this is where regressions will come into play. Regressions can help us tease this out.